Skill 7, Conditional Statements. For this first example, we're going to identify both the hypothesis and the conclusion of the statement. So for part A, if we have the statement, if an animal is a robin, then the animal is a bird, we want to come up with the hypothesis, which is the P part, and the conclusion, which is the Q part. The hypothesis would be the first part, following the if. If an animal is a robin. The conclusion would be the animal is a bird. For part B, our statement is if an angle measures 130, then the angle is obtuse. That would make the hypothesis an angle measures 130, and the conclusion is the angle is obtuse. For example 2, we want to write the statements as conditionals. For part A, vertical angles share a vertex, so we need to figure out how to change that into an if-then statement. So I'm going to start, if two angles are vertical, then the two angles share a vertex. So you just break it up into two separate parts. If something is true, then the next thing is true. For part B, dolphins are mammals. So again, I'm going to try to break this up into if-then statement. So I'm going to start with, if an animal is a dolphin, then the animal is a mammal. Okay, so just split it up however you can to make it an if-then statement. Example 3, what we're going to be doing is telling the truth value of a certain statement. So for A, we have if a woman is from Spain, then she is European. So we look at the first part and we say if that is true, then we have to make sure the second part is true for that to be a true statement. So if a woman is from Spain, that's what we're looking at first. Okay, so now we're going to assume that part's true, and we want to tell, is she a European? Well, since Spain is a European country, that would mean yes. So this statement is true because Spain is a European country. So that would be your answer there. For part B, if a number is divisible by 3, then it is odd. Okay, so on this one we need to think about what we mean here. So if a number is divisible by 3, that means you can divide by 3, then it has to be odd. That's what we're saying. So we're going to assume that it is divisible by 3. So let's find a number that's divisible by 3. 9 or 3, or both of those are divisible by 3. However, if we keep looking, we can find an even number that is also divisible by 3. So this one is actually false because a counterexample could be if we take 30 and we divide that by 3, we get 10, so that means 30 is divisible by 3. However, 30 is not odd. So that means the statement is not going to always be true. When looking for counterexamples, you got to make sure that every single instance it would be true. So in this case, 30 divided by 3 is divisible by 3, but it's not an odd number. So it's that kind of thing. Look for things that aren't true. And for the last example, we're going to be writing and finding the truth statements. So given the conditional statement, we want to find the converse, the inverse, and the contrapositive. Okay, so first thing we want to do is find the P and find the Q, then we just have to switch them around. So if the figure is a square, then the figure is a quadrilateral. So your if statement, if the figure is a square. Okay, so that's the first part, that's your P value. then the figure is a quadrilateral. So that would be the other portion, or the Q part of this statement. So now with the converse, inverse, and contrapositive, you just have to mix all those things around. For the converse, what you have to do is simply switch the P and the Q. So the converse reads, if the figure is a quadrilateral, then the figure is a square. Now, for the inverse, what you have to do is leave it the same, except you switch both of the statements to not statements. So the inverse would read, if the figure is not a square, then it is not a quadrilateral. And finally, the contrapositive is where you switch the P and the Q, and you switch them both to not statements, or negations. So the contrapositive would read, if the figure is not a quadrilateral, then the figure is not a square. Okay, so now when we're looking at these, we need to notice that if the original conditional is true, then the contrapositive is true. If the converse is true, then the inverse is true. So those are what we call equivalent statements. So it just make sure you're careful on how you're writing it and you have your negations in the proper locations, and it should be fine. That's it for Skill 7, Conditional Statements. Summarize your notes, go through some practice problems, and then you should be ready for your quiz over this material.